Boo! Did I get you? If you are anything like me, when I think of a summer thriller, I want something fast-paced, something that will keep my attention, and something I can read in a relatively short amount of time. So these are my top 5 thriller books that I think that you should read in the summer that kind of checks off all those requirements. Now, number 1 is one of my recent favorites, and that is The Couple Next Door. This is my first book by this author, Shari Lapina, and oh my goodness. I'm looking back at this book now, and there was not a single thing I would have changed. There wasn't a single thing that I didn't like. It was a 5-star through and through. And let me just explain to you what's going on here. Now, this couple, Anne and Marco, they just had a baby, so they're kind of all over the place. Anne is dealing with a lot of stress and they kind of just want to blow off some steam. So they go over to their neighbor's house for like a little get together. And while they're there, they decide to leave their 6-month-old baby in the house, but they keep the baby monitor onto them. Now, as you can imagine, something happens and it's a huge tragedy. Once they go home, they're just trying to figure out what the heck happened. They call the police and you kind of just follow that story and watch it unravel. I loved this story so much because at first you're given absolutely no details. You don't know what's going on. Your jaw is on the floor. You're trying to figure out what the heck happened, right? And every paragraph, every chapter, you were given just a whole new layer of the story. And it just got progressively more complex, and the tension, the steady build of the tension was just insane. Every time I thought I knew what was gonna happen, something else crazy happened. And then I had to like tie in all the things together. Now, I will say, generally with thrillers, I try to figure out what's gonna happen before it happens. And with this one, I figured out 1 or 2 things, but I definitely could not figure out everything. And I think even the best of us couldn't have figured out all of the things that happened to this book. And I think that's why it's so good. And not only that, this book is relatively short. It's only 308 pages. And to pack a punch like that in such a short book, it's very hard to do. And I think that's also why I really love this book, because it's like, you cannot put it down. It's so good. Every chapter leaves you with like another piece of the puzzle and you just want to figure it out so bad. This built up tension makes you continue to read, so you end up reading it in a day or 2. I also really love this book because it was written in 3rd person, but you get the perspective of all the main characters, all the main moving pieces. And I don't know what it was about it, but like, she did such a wonderful job of showing each person's mental state or their thought process, why they decided to do certain things. And nobody's good here. Besides the detectives, no one is good. Everyone is morally gray and borderline like just bad people in general. But because you get to see their thought process, you kind of understand where they're coming from, even though you know as your own person, you would never do what they're doing. It's like, I see why you're thinking that way, I guess. And that's very interesting. It's very hard to pull off like morally gray characters, because generally, at least for me, it's like either you're a good person or you're a bad person. I need to know why you're doing these sketchy things, and I need to understand why you feel like you've been pushed into these certain situations. Now, there's certain characters in this book where I'm like, I don't care what you say, there is no reason for what you did. And even that is so fun, because it's like, you know, in your mind, you would never do something like this. And it's just interesting to see how it plays out. She did such a good job of not only telling the story, but like showing each person's mental state and why they were doing what they were doing, and how it like interacted with the actual story from everyone's perspective. And I just thought that that was so interesting. It was just so good. I literally could not put it down. Every chapter, my like jaw was on the floor. Seriously, like it was just such a good book. I have never been like floored the way that I was floored after this book, especially for a thriller. I feel like romances can definitely do that for me. Literary fiction can do that for me. But for a thriller, I feel like this one and one of the other books that I'm going to talk about soon are the only 2 thrillers that genuinely left me like awestruck, where I'm like, I need to read more from this author. And that's definitely what this did for me. I know she wrote some other like really good books. So she also wrote Someone We Know, and I think Everyone's Lying or Everyone's a Liar or something like that, something to the lines of that. And I heard that that was really good too. So I'm definitely going to read more from this author. But wow, I just love this one so much. If you don't listen to anything else from this, I think this one and the one that I'm going to talk about next are the 2 books that you should definitely read in the summertime. I just thought that they were incredible. Now, the second book is a book that I read last year, but it has still left an impact on me, and that is The Silent Patient. Now, this one is a little bit thicker, I'm not going to lie, but I promise you, you will still breeze through it. I read this in a day last year. Granted, I was doing a 24-hour reading vlog, but I feel like even if I wasn't doing a 24-hour reading vlog, I still would have read it in a day or 2. It was just that good. Now, this book is only 323 pages, so it's not that bad still. But I will say that this goes a little bit slower than the other book, The Couple Next Door. With this book, you jump right into the story. You are immediately in the thick of it, but with this one, it's kind of a slow build up, but then I feel like the end is definitely a really good payoff. With this book, I don't know how to explain it without telling too much information, but this psychiatrist is trying to work with a patient who killed her husband in cold blood and immediately stopped talking. And she hasn't talked for years, and he's trying to be the one person that she opens up to, right? And so you follow him trying to get close to her, trying to be like a good doctor for her. And you also see his personal life. You get to see like the backsides of him and why he's in this profession in the first place, the things that he's dealing with in his personal life, and how it intertwines with the patient. Now that's pretty much everything I can tell you without giving you any more information. That's like gonna be a little compromising, but I'm telling you, when I read this book last year, I was shook. I don't know if it was because it was one of the first thrillers I read last year, and it was like, last year was my first time really getting into thrillers anyway, so I don't know if that played a factor, but it is highly rated on Goodreads, and when I read it, I was genuinely floored. I did not see it coming. Some people say that they did, but I'm like, how? There's just no way. I couldn't have seen it coming until they started talking about it, and I was just like, wait. And then everything, I swear to you, it felt like a puzzle in my mind. All the pieces started going into the right place, and I was like, shook. You know that meme where Mr. Krabs is like, that's how I was. I just was so shook. I could not believe that's what was going on. So I highly recommend it. I feel like even though it is a little bit of a slow start, you're still always invested because he does a really good job of explaining like the details of the story. And as he's investigating this patient and you see him doing like the outside work outside of the hospital, I feel like personally all of those details kept me engaged, even though it was a slow build up to the actual solution or resolution to the story. And it has just enough tension to make you continue to read the chapters. Now with this book, the chapters are a little bit longer, and I kind of hate that, but with this one here, the chapters were shorter. So if anything, if you're just dipping your toe into thrillers, this is definitely the perfect one to start with. But this one really got me last year. I still think about it to this day. Like, I just could not believe that's what was going on. Like, I don't know, it got me. Some people didn't like it, but I definitely really enjoyed it. And I felt like he did such a good job of painting one picture so that when the curtains were pulled, you were just completely and utterly taken off guard. And I think that's all you can really ask for in a thriller. It was psychological, it was witty, it was very clever. There was a lot of like intellect into it. And I think those are the type of thrillers that I usually gravitate towards because it requires you to have so much mental focus on the story. And I feel like that just makes it a little bit more realistic. So I highly recommend this one. This is something that you can breeze through in the summertime. Now we'll switch gears a little bit and go to a classic. This is another book that I read last year during like Halloween time. And though it is a little slow, it is very short, and I was completely floored when I read it. And that book is Frankenstein, the original by Mary Shelley. Oh my gosh, I loved it so much. I think the reason why I really enjoyed it, even though the beginning is very slow, I will give you that. I think the reason why I really enjoyed it last year and I would have loved to have read it in the summer is because we got the perspective of Frankenstein, the actual monster. We got to see why he was the way he was. Like, everyone loves to point the finger at Frankenstein and make him the villain in the story, but it's very interesting to see the original and how he's not necessarily the villain. And even if he is and was, it's because of what he has gone through, and he didn't want to be made anyway. You know what I mean? Like, it gave you a fresh perspective and an opportunity to be empathetic when I felt like I never would have been otherwise. And this is a classic story. We all know Frankenstein. This is the monster that was created by the scientists, and he just wanted to have this companion, this friend, and it turns out to go very, very horribly wrong. But he doesn't take any accountability, and he tries to blame everything on the monster. And it just made me like take a step back and see the story in a completely new way. And I think that's why I loved it so much, and that's why I think it would be a great summer read, because it's just something new, something interesting that maybe you wouldn't have read otherwise, and can make you think in a new way. And though this book is only 221 pages, child, the font is real small and there's barely any spacing. It's a classic through and through, so just keep that in mind. And I will say, like, again, the beginning is very slow, but once it picks up, I was completely hooked. Me personally, I was hooked, okay? It was so good. And I just love the edition that I have. They've been redoing all the classics, like the covers, and I just love this one. How pretty is this? In like a very creepy way, but like not too much, you know what I mean? And then on the back it says, "You are my creator, but I am your master. Obey." Like, what? You know what I mean? It's just, I don't know. I really enjoyed it. I feel like this is one that anyone can read and really enjoy as well, because it's not something that I feel like we often talk about, and it was just so enjoyable when I read it. Now with number 4, I don't have the physical book because I did lend it to my niece and she loves it so far, and that one is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I'm bringing this one up now because I know that the show just came out and I heard that it's really good, so I wanted to just throw this in here too because I really enjoyed it when I read it. It is more like a popular thriller, a more popular suspense, and it is YA, but it was still really enjoyable. Now this story is about this girl. She's doing a school project and she's trying to like solve the town's like mystery. This girl, she died and went missing and they're all blaming it on this one kid, but she feels like he's not necessarily guilty, and she's just trying to do her own detective work and follow the story and see what really happened, and you're just like following along with her. And I loved it. It wasn't slow in the beginning by any means, but it really picked up towards the end, and every turn I was like, oh my goodness, what is happening? It's around 300 pages too, just like the other books, and it was just so enjoyable. I really liked it because she had illustrations, so she had the emails, she had articles and stuff like that, and it just added a little more depth to the story, and I felt like it was nice and refreshing. After reading paragraphs of one story, you got to see like the actual maps and stuff like that in it, so that was really enjoyable. And Pip was just so cute. Like, she's a high schooler, she's really trying to work really hard to figure out what's going on. She's starting to develop these feelings for the kid that she's trying to prove is innocent, and it was just such a good book. It was just really interesting. I do have the second book, Good Girl Bad Blood, and I haven't read this yet, but I heard that the series, I think it's 3 or 4 books in this series, gets progressively crazier. So I just want to see, first of all, how is that even possible? Because with the way that the first book ended, it felt pretty set and done. Like, I felt like this is it for the story, right? But apparently it gets even crazier. So I definitely do want to read this before the year is up, but I just haven't gotten around to it. But that book is definitely one that you should read in the summer because it's fast paced, it's easygoing, it's not too much commitment, and it has a really good storyline. Now, last but not least is another book that I finished in a day. It was not bad, but it wasn't one of my favorites. I did have higher expectations for it because it was my first time reading this author, and I heard that she was really, really good. And for me personally, just this book in particular, it ended up being lackluster for me. But the reason why it's still making this list is because I did genuinely enjoy it. I finished it in a day, and it wasn't bad. Again, it wasn't bad. It was just mediocre for me, and I just had higher expectations for it. And that book was Never Lie by Frida McFadden. Again, this was my first Frida McFadden book. I do hear that the teacher and the co-worker is better, so I'll definitely still give her a shot. Like, I'm not nixing her off or anything. I just thought that this would be better. The reason why I didn't enjoy it is because it follows this couple. I think it's Trisha and Ethan. Yes, they're currently house hunting, and they go house hunting during a storm, and they kind of get snowed in at this mansion that used to be owned by a doctor, Dr. Adrienne Hale, and she was a psychiatrist that went missing 4 years prior, and her house is literally still in the same state that it was when she went missing, so it's a little eerie. And while they're staying there for a few days, Trisha is looking for something to entertain herself, and she finds a few of the books of Dr. Hale's. And while she's looking in between the books, she finds like these cassette tapes, and she realizes that Dr. Hale has been recording all of her sessions with all of her patients. And you just follow that story and see how it unravels and how it relates to everything else. I think that that premise alone is really good. I just felt like the execution wasn't my favorite. I just felt like she was spelling out everything too much for us, but again, it was something that was very fast paced, very easy to read. The chapters were very short, and every chapter left you wanting to read another chapter. I think that's like the key with summer reading, especially with thrillers. Like, you want something fast paced, easygoing, something to keep your attention. While you're on a beach, you can like speed through a whole book and figure out what's going on. Those are the type of summer thrillers that I look for, and this definitely hits all of those things. It just wasn't one of my favorites, but again, it wasn't terrible. And just as a bonus one, I do want to add Finley Donovan is killing it. I have talked about this book a few times before, but I just think it's so easygoing. It's funny, it's humorous, it still has a thriller element, but it's still lighthearted enough to be perfect for summer. And I thought that her humor in it was really good, and I thought that the twists and turns, even though it was a bit ridiculous at times and definitely not realistic, they were still funny enough to where I'm like, girl, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Finley Donovan, if you're not familiar with it, she is a writer who is just currently going through a divorce. She is a single mom at this point. She doesn't really have a lot of money, and she's just trying to make ends meet and just get her life together. And during this time, her publisher is asking for her next book, and so she makes something up on the fly, and she's like, okay, I'm gonna write this murder for hire book, and she's explaining it to her publisher at a restaurant, and someone overhears her and mistakes her as a hitman. And so once she's alone and she's about to leave, the person slips some money for her and tells her to her husband. And so you follow her like accidentally becoming this character, and just how the crazy twists and turns relate to her life. It really is insane. It's just so unrealistic and so just ridiculous that it's very comical. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was funny enough and it was good enough, but it is a little bit thicker. It's about 360 pages, so nothing crazy, still something that you could probably finish in a few days, and it was definitely enjoyable. So that was pretty quick and sweet, to the point. Those are all the summer thrillers that I feel like anyone would enjoy. And if I missed any, or there's some that you want to recommend, please leave them in the comments below. And I guess I'll see you guys next time. I love you. Bye. Mwah.